Ridiculously Happy People cast. I'm Sophia Lemon, and today I'm talking to Melissa Twist from Melissa Twist Events. And if you don't know Melissa Twist is an amazing wedding planner. So we're going to talk all about weddings. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
Good. It's really snowy outside, so it feels like it's officially, it hasn't felt like winter, and then kind of we get dumped on the snow and you're like, oh yeah, it's winter.
I've been thinking we're really lacking in the cold department this
Yes.
winter. Like it's just been too warm to be winter, which is
No.
all
Yeah.
right, but what can you do? So, Melissa, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, how you came to be a wedding planner? Take it away.
So it's hard to believe, but I've been working in the industry for 20 years. I was one of those people where I knew immediately coming out of school what I wanted to do for a living. Planning events has been a passion of mine for as long as I can remember. I have some of my, I was just pulling them out the other day, some of my portfolios from when I was like 10, 12 years old, where I would take pictures of my birthday parties and then put it into a scrapbook that I would refer to as my portfolio. So it's always something that I was truly passionate about. And you saw that in the elaborate birthday parties that I would throw for my girlfriends growing up. So I actually went to school at George Brown College and studied special event plannings. And then from there, it kind of kicks off my career. And my evolution is I've worked in all types of venues. So anywhere from private to public golf courses, ski clubs, conference centers, um, private estates, you name it, for restaurants. I've done events, all different kinds, corporate socials and weddings, where kind of through my career. And then 7 years ago, I made the transition from Toronto up to Collingwood. And now I service the South Georgian Bay area. And I have been doing that for the last 7 years, which it's hard to believe. And I find that it just naturally that I'm working a lot of private property wedding. So where we're bringing in the tent or where we're working off an existing structure like a barn or the estate to facilitate the wedding. So that seems to be my specialty that I just kind of fell into. And it is logistically a nightmare. There's a lot of moving parts, but I love it. It keeps me on my toes. And there's always new aspects of things, especially when you're dealing with it's not the same venue time over time. It's unique to the individual elements of the private property. So it keeps things exciting.
So, what was it about weddings that you were like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go in that direction?
I've just always loved weddings. I love the idea of couples coming together to showcase their love in front of their closest family and friends and have this great party to celebrate their love. And I love in my role that I get to be part of that special day that hopefully they'll remember for the rest of their lives.
Mhm.
So it's really, my role, it can be stressful at times, but when the couple at the end of the day are like, Melissa, we couldn't have done it without us. I couldn't believe, we were thinking of maybe not hiring a planner, but you made this day that much more special. We could really feel like we could relax knowing that you had our back and was making sure that all the details that we had discussed leading up to our special day were being executed on. So,
I
yeah.
have to say, as a wedding photographer, weddings where there's a good planner involved are completely different from weddings where there is not a good planner involved, mostly just with the level of confusion on the part of the couple.
Yes.
Usually, when I work with a couple that's not working with a planner, they're just like, we don't know what we're supposed to do every step of the
Yes.
way.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
And that's what I love to be able to say to my clients, if you want, all the vendors can be, because sometimes they're just like, oh, I can't deal with the pressure of, all these people, because that's not normal everyday life that you would have potentially 10, 15, 20 people kind of nudging on your shoulder, being like, what's happening now? Who, what, when, where. So a lot of clients love that I'm there. So they can sit back and relax, and all the questions, concerns, logistical things are coming to me in my
Mhm.
role. So they can feel like they can truly just absorb and be present in their wedding day.
Yeah. Which, as far as I'm concerned, is kind of how it should be, in
Yes,
my humble
you
opinion.
would think so, but I've worked with some interesting vendors, and also
Mm.
I've seen it all with guests as well, where I'm like, I'm sorry you didn't get the exact meal that you order or whatever it may be, that the AC isn't to your liking. Don't go to the bride and groom. This is their day. Try to figure it out, without having to bother them with that kind of silliness.
Number of complaints that you can have at a wedding is
Yes.
kind of remarkable. Like, I once had a guest walk up to me and say, pointed at the bridesmaids and said, "You should be dressed like that." And I'm thinking,
Oh my gosh.
I'm about to lay down on the floor, so I probably should not be wearing a knee-length dress. Just saying.
Oh my gosh. People are interesting. Let's just say that, especially when it comes to weddings.
It's pretty amazing. I'm not going to lie. So I wanted to do this sort of a wedding series to sort of talk about doing weddings differently. Because most of the time when I talk to couples, they're like, we don't know what we're supposed to do, as if there is like a defined process to planning a wedding and also like a standard of how your wedding should look. And I know that we think that there is a standard based on all of the weddings that we have gone to, but there isn't. And I kind of wanted to get into doing weddings the way that people just want to do them. Like, it doesn't have to be anything in particular. You don't have to have a wedding color. You don't have to like do anything in particular. Your wedding could literally just be whatever you want it to be. Um, and I know you have experience with this sort of stuff, so I'm super thrilled to be talking to you about this stuff, because while I can give some experience, some advice based on my experience, I'm not super familiar with absolutely every aspect of planning a wedding, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, except for all of those fun wedding checklists that I have looked at in the past. And we were just talking about this before we started recording. And one of the things that I've noticed in those checklists is they're very specific. They're very traditional. And sometimes they will break down like the cost of the wedding and like percentages of like your venue should be 20% of your wedding budget. Your photographer should be 10% of your wedding budget. Your linen should be, I don't know. I didn't pay attention to that particular percentage. But I
Yes,
just find that stuff so absurd. So we are going to start talking about just doing shit the way that you want to friggin' do it.
exactly. Coming out of the pandemic, I was really hopeful that that would kind of change people's perspectives, because we were
Yeah.
doing these smaller, more intimate weddings. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding, unfortunately, people are going back to, I don't know if it's society pressure or just kind of going back to the norm of this, like, oh, we need to have 120 people. The timeline needs to look like this. We need to have these elements. And every time I get into a consultation with a potential new client, I go, there are no rules. It's whatever you want to do. Don't let, what your friends did or what your parents are telling you or wherever the pressures are coming from, just ignore that. And it's like, what would you want your day to look like if you didn't have any of that noise around you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because a lot of couples haven't even thought about it. They're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of, I guess it's always been like, oh, well, this is how it's done. And I'm
Yeah.
like, but why? I'm like always trying to pitch like these different, I'm like, still, I haven't done a brunch wedding, but I still like, I'm like, how about a Sunday brunch wedding? And like
Mm-hmm.
everything's wrapped up at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't been
Mm-hmm.
able to sell it to a couple yet, but like it's still on my bucket list personally to do just a phenomenal brunch wedding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and it is something that as a planner, I get the question all the time, like, how much should we be budgeting for this amount of people.
Yeah.
And I go, that is just the it's such a loaded question,
Hmm.
and it really needs to be broken down. And I know we're going to
Hmm.
talk about that because like you said, here's a checklist that says 20% or whatever needs to go to your venue. How about if you're holding your wedding at your private property in your backyard?
Hmm.
Well, you don't need any percentage of your budget going to the venue because it's
Hmm.
free because you
Yep.
it's a family property or it's your property. So,
Yeah, for sure. I love that you mentioned the brunch wedding because I did make a blog post like years ago and with alternative wedding itineraries, and one of them was just a brunch wedding. And
yeah.
I would love to photograph a brunch wedding, like go for like what, like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and
Yes.
be done by 1. That
Yes.
would be right up my alley and very much in line with my sleep schedule.
Yes.
um, whereas, the 6, 7, 8 hour weddings that go into like 10 o'clock at night or not so much. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because a
I would.
lot of my clients still want to keep the party going to 1 a.m. And it's interesting doing reading. There's a lot of people that are sober curious or just are going sober. And I'm wondering if that's going to translate into the timeline because it's like, why don't we just start things earlier and wrap things up at like 10:30,
Mhm.
11? Why does it have to go until 1 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
So I haven't seen that kind of in my clients' timelines going into the next couple of years, but I see more and more alternatives, so mocktails or drinks that are 0%, like that needs to be
Mm-hmm.
part of our when we're building out our bars. It's definitely something that needs to be incorporated, where a couple of years ago that wasn't even um a thought process for, during the planning to have any alternatives really available other than just, the sodas and sparkling water,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing.
And we're totally going to talk about that in an episode because I remember you telling me a story about alcohol going wrong at a private
Yes.
property wedding. So that
Yes.
is definitely something that we're going to have to talk about because, I mean, you're having an open bar or even a cash bar or a donation bar or whatever you're
Yes.
doing, and you have people showing up for your party and they're getting trashed. It's, a potentially dangerous situation. So we're definitely going to talk about that at some
Yeah, for
point.
sure.
But I definitely wanted to start with this just introduction and like, what are some like different things that people can do? So in terms of like wedding itineraries, obviously a brunch.
Yes.
Um, so for your wedding, like you're obviously going to have a ceremony for most weddings.
Yes. And I've seen that kind of switch a little bit
Mhm.
where a lot of people don't like the everyone's staring at me. It's too much
Yep.
pressure.
Yep.
And they're trying to figure out alternatives. Like, do we actually need to have a ceremony, or can we just bring our closest family and friends together and just have a celebration? And we do the ceremony either a different date with just immediate family and friends, closest family and
Mhm.
friends. So it's something that it's hard because I actually have a client where we're for this coming season, for the 24 season, where it's exactly that. And they're going, Melissa, how can we make our guests? I feel like our guests are going to be disappointed if they show up for what they think, oh, this is a wedding, but they don't get to experience an actual ceremony. So we're working through of like, okay, well, how could we do something really special
Mhm.
to make sure that your guests feel like they were part of this kind of your love story, but it's
Mhm.
not the traditional walking down the aisle. So I've pitched a bunch of ideas to them. We haven't landed on anything, and I don't know if it's ultimately going to end up going back to, yes, we just feel like we need to do the traditional ceremony of walking down the aisle, the vows, the whole thing.
Mhm.
But so many of my couples are wanting a family friend to officiate, but
Yep.
they don't have uh, the qualifications to be able to do it legally. So they're
Mhm.
getting married months in advance,
Mhm.
not telling any of their guests that they're already married.
Yep.
Surprise. but they're going through the show of the actual ceremony, but then they have a family friend that officiates for them. So they're not doing all the signing of the paperwork and making it official has already been done weeks, months in advance. And they get to have it be more personalized because they work with their family friend to really write kind of what that ceremony looks like and make it super personal to what they want it to look like. So that's fun. That's interesting. It's funny when I'm like, so are you telling your guests? Because it is one of those things where like, no, we don't. We want them to feel like this is actually happening in real time. So
Hmm.
most of the time, my couples choose not to tell their guests that, and they kind of go through the motions of
Hmm.
this is really happening, really like it's happening now, and no one's, yeah, I've done a bunch of them and no one's kind of been upset. Like because
Yeah.
I guess they're ultimately worried that the guests are going to feel like, oh, this is not what I signed up for. Like I wanted a
Hmm.
real ceremony, not whatever this was. But I've had no kind of pushback from any of the guests
Hmm.
on that.
Yeah. I've always thought, because that is definitely happening more frequently. Like I'm seeing that. And I don't even necessarily know sometimes, I'll be photographing the ceremony. I'll be like, I can't help but notice that no one is signing any paperwork.
Yes, that's
Um,
normally the giveaway, right?
I
No
don't,
paperwork.
and I don't think a lot of guests really clue into that fact, despite the fact that half of the guests are probably married. So, like, they've done it
Yeah.
before. Like, they know that you have to sign paperwork. I'm kind of surprised that people are not like, oh.
Yeah.
Um, oh, and here's an idea too. You don't have to legally get married. You don't have to sign the paperwork. You could just have a ceremony to celebrate yourselves. That's an option as well.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But
Um,
I would
let's,
love to it's it and I it's very hard to have that like it's hard for couples where they're like I feel like this need it doesn't matter what I want. I really feel
mhm,
like if people are coming to a wedding, they
mhm,
need to see the ceremony and they can't kind of wrap their head around if this
mhm.
looked different.
Yeah.
Um so it'll be interesting to see if that changes over the years. It's like this is
Hmm.
step one where we're doing the pretend ceremonies and maybe farther along you'll start seeing people just completely eliminate them altogether.
For sure.
Because so many times the guests, they're checked out during the ceremony. I don't know if you ever watch
Yes.
guests during, because I know you're busy, right? So
Yeah.
maybe it's over, but it is so many guests are so checked out. They're just
Mhm.
like, I want to get on to the cocktail hour. I
Yeah.
want to, catch up with friends and family, grab a drink. There is the few that are really
Mhm.
into it. And
Mhm.
then there's the handful of others that are just like, okay, when is this going to be over?
Mhm.
I tell my clients that I'm like, 'cause it's
Mhm.
true. A lot of your guests could not really care about the vows and
Yeah.
all those things. So
We're taking a quick break, and while we do, I have a favor to ask you. Would you please take just a couple of moments to leave us a rating and a review in your podcast app of choice? Your feedback really goes a long way in helping us reach new people and also improve the podcast. So thanks very much. And we're back to the show.
that's something that's interesting. The whole not non-ceremony, not having a ceremony at
Yeah.
all. I've pitched the idea to other couples. It's like,
Yes.
why do we have to keep the party going until 1 a.m.? Why don't we just start everything a little bit earlier? Because most of the time, couples just want time to actually talk to their families and friends, and they feel like their timeline is so jam-packed. They're like, I didn't have a time to talk to anyone, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
why not have a longer cocktail hour where there's more time to actually have one-on-one conversations with people, or looking at, I love the idea of not a traditional sit down 3-course dinner. I love doing kind of stations and past canapes so people can mingle and
Mhm.
move throughout. So it's like, I'll sit with these couple people for a while and then I'll get up, get another small plate, sit down with someone else. And that also gives time for the bride and groom, where typically that's like a hard 2.5, 3 hours where people are like at their table eating and speech time where that could be more casual. And so
Mhm.
the couple can be, it's like an extension of the cocktail hour. They'll have time to sit with different guests and be able to catch up with them and actually have
Mhm.
one-on-one conversations with everyone. So I like pitching that idea to
Mhm.
'cause personally, I love it when going to a wedding. It's like, oh no, we're stuck with these,
Yeah.
you know, people for the next 3 hours. I don't know them, the small
Yeah.
chat, the awkwardness. So I
Yeah.
like the option to be kind of be able to move around and like meet new people and chit chat. And other people hate that idea. They're like, if I do the stations and cocktails, they'll find a table and that will be their table. So they like, they're not moving, right? And
Yeah.
they end up doing the whole formal sit down dinner
Mhm.
by themselves type thing, they on their own.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I like pitching that idea because that's always feedback that I get from my couples is like, it went too fast. I didn't get to talk to anyone. So I always make suggestions like that to have more social time where you'll be able to have time with your guests.
That's something I have always prioritized in my business is not turning your entire wedding into one long photo shoot. Like I have when I first started out, I definitely experienced the, cocktail 3 hours of
Yeah.
photos at another location, literally not spending half of the time that your guests are there with your guests.
Yes.
I really hate that idea so much. Um, Partially because you're not actually enjoying your wedding, and partially because no one needs 3 hours worth of photos from their wedding of just them and their wedding party. I'm sorry, but you don't.
Yeah.
Um, so I like moving things around for my couples. Like I often recommend, if we do the photos before the ceremony, it's going to be a heck of a lot faster. You do not need 3 hours for photos during your cocktail hour. I don't know why it's called a cocktail hour if it people usually
Yes.
end up spending much more time than that taking photos. So much faster before the ceremony. And you ask the people you want there to be there, get all of the photos done. And at the end of the ceremony, you just do whatever the heck you want. You actually get
Yes.
to hang out with your
Yeah.
guests.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
I have so many couples now where I'm kind of, okay, what's more important to you? And it's like it always comes down to like I want to actually spend time with my guests. So I'm like, okay, you know what this means? Exactly what you're speaking to.
Yeah.
We need to build this in prior to ceremony so that it's
Mhm.
done. And as soon as the ceremony's done, you don't need to be whisked away or any of this kind of stuff. You're right into the
Yeah.
celebration of things. And you don't need to go off to take photos. I do have some couples where they're like, I need to do a few photos after the ceremony. So I
Mhm.
always go, okay, we'll try to keep that shot list as small as possible because I know what you're going to end up saying to me.
Mhm.
Can we just get this going? Like, I want to
Yeah.
join my friends and family in cocktail hour. And I'm like, I told you. So, like,
Yeah.
that's why, like, if you can't get those key people, let's say they're before the ceremony logistically because of transportation or because of whatever is going on, you can't get them on site where you want to do photos. Just having that built into the timeline, but trying to keep it as short and sweet as possible. Like one
Mhm.
location, and here's the people I want photos with, and we just kind of bang it out really quickly right after the ceremony, so you can kind of jump into things and start
Mhm.
enjoying the party.
Mhm. I can't wait until people just start having their weddings like Wednesday evening. Just like
Yes.
any day of the week, anywhere they want for a fraction of the cost that they would spend on a Saturday.
Yes. Have you found, because I've had a few Fridays and Sundays, but it's not as like nothing midweek. Like I would let,
No.
people just, they think it has, I feel like the majority of people feel like if I'm having a wedding, it has to fall on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Um, have you noticed kind of any changes there in terms of, hey, I'm open to a midweek wedding? Is that something you're seeing in your,
I haven't seen a whole lot of that, to be honest with you. And I'm surprised because I was thinking the same thing that you were thinking during COVID. People are doing these really intimate weddings. I was photographing couples who were saying we were literally never going to get married because if we got
yes,
married, we knew that we'd have to have 200 people and we didn't want to do that. So there were people that I photographed who like had started their family. They were having their babies and then COVID hit and they were like, oh, this is like perfect time. Let's get married.
Yes.
And then they had 5 people, and it was just the best thing they ever did. Those weddings were on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And now it does seem like people have gone back to Saturdays, maybe Fridays, maybe Sundays.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not seeing stuff midweek. And I mean, I think a lot of our culture is with weddings is still wrapped up with it's going to be a whole weekend long thing. We're going to have bachelorette party. We're going to have like a welcome party. We're going to, have our rehearsal dinner. We're going to have our hair and makeup in the morning, wedding ceremony, reception with 70 billion speeches that are 20 minutes long.
Yes.
And then Sunday, we're all going to get up and have hungover brunch together.
Yes.
It's a lot. And, if that's what you want, that's freaking fantastic. That's great. Your checklist is all set. You can download that one from the internet. But if that stresses you out, I am not that person. I would not be having a Saturday wedding. I would not be getting my hair and makeup done at 9 o'clock in the morning and then waiting until 3 o'clock to get married and wearing a white dress and all that
I've had
stuff.
to start hair and makeup sometimes at 5:30 in the morning because the work back schedule, there's so many bridesmaids and aunts and moms and grandmas, and everyone needs to be ready for photo time. And I'm like, I did your work back schedule, and who's going to be the first few people? Because no one wants those spots. Right? No one wants to be. And they've all got too excited the night before and maybe had a few too many bevies. So it's like no one wants to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning getting their hair and makeup done and then sitting around until 3 o'clock, right? So
yeah, it's insane. It's totally crazy.
This is the reality if you want to do it this way. And it's so interesting how it is funny. It's like, how are the majority of people want to do it this way, where it's like you said, just, okay, if that's what you want to do, download it from the internet. I'm like, why isn't there more people that want to do the non-traditional route, right? Yeah. So
I think you might have hit the nail on the head with that one before we got on the podcast when you mentioned about receiving gifts from parents. And also I think we just like build our family into this wedding that we've been planning our entire lives. Like, it's a celebration with our families, and then, what the family wants kind of takes over what the couple wants. And like, you have probably seen people arguing with their parents. I have definitely seen entire families just not getting along on the wedding day. Couples feeling like they're being pushed into things. One of my friends ended up getting married at a golf course, and she was not this type of person. The whole big wedding ceremony and reception and everything, it was not her. It was like just her mother-in-law said, this is what's happening. I'm booking it. You're getting married on this day at this place. This is what's happening. But I actually saw, like, years ago, I had a wedding booked, and the bride had been telling me leading up to the wedding the entire time. Like, I had them booked for like a year in advance leading up to the wedding. Every time we spoke, she was talking about how stressed she was about the expense of it. And then like a week before, you get the email saying, we've decided not to get married. We're canceling the wedding. I'm like, okay. And then a couple years later, they're posting photos of this elopement that they did. And I'm like, yes, this makes so much more sense for you, given everything that you had explained to me. Like, you're talking about this couple was having the wedding at their house, and they're like, we have to get a tent. We have to get chairs and tables. We have to have linens. We have to do all of this stuff. And in my mind, I'm going, you don't have to do any of those things. Hire a cleaning company to clean your house. Have the ceremony and reception outside. And if it rains, go inside. Like, you don't have to do anything in particular. But I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think the people who don't want to go to the traditional route and then go the traditional route, I think they're probably pushed a bit by their parents. So why don't we talk about that? Because you did mention setting clear expectations.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When I go to contract with my clients, I'm very honest about, here's some things to watch out for. In my 20 years of experience, trust me, I've seen pretty much it all. So budget is one of the first things that we talk about. And I go, to be completely transparent with you, you have to have really maybe awkward or hard conversations if you are going to be receiving a large gift
Mhm.
from parents, because they might have an expectation of like, well, if I'm going to contribute X amount of dollars to your wedding
Mhm.
budget, they have in their mind, well, this means that, I get a say on every single element of the wedding and it's going to go this way and that way. And I go, you have to, because that is what, and like you said, it leads to so much stress, anxiety, resentment. And
Mhm.
it's like the couple has to decide, are we going to do this completely on our own? And
Mhm.
then we'll say to our parents, you can, have your thoughts or your opinions, but at the end of the day, we're paying for this wedding. We want it to make it truly ours. We
Mhm.
might want to, say, okay, well, if the mom said, well, the mom of the bride said, I really would like to see you get married in a church. You could say, we'll take that under consideration, but at the end of the day, it's the couple's, decision how they move forward with the different
Mhm.
elements of their wedding. But I think it's super important to just like, okay, are we paying for it on our own? And then if there's two sets of parents or, extended step parents and all that, let them know, okay, like,
Mhm.
this is what's happening. We'd love to get if you wanted to be open to like, oh, suggestions, but sometimes the couples are like, no, we've made it very clear. This is our wedding. They can have all the opinions that they want, but we're going to do what we want to do. If you are going to receive a gift or a contribution from a set of parents, making sure it's really understood because they might have an expectation. Oh, well, I'm giving them X amount of dollars. That means this in their
Mhm.
mind. They get to relive the wedding they never had X amount of years ago. And
Yeah.
that's when it just leads to so much chaos, stress. I've had in the past where now I only have like it's set in my contract, like who is my point of contact, because I've had
Yes.
moms and mother-in-laws emailing me on the down low being like, I know so and so said this, but actually we're not going to move forward with that specific vendor. We're actually going to do this. And it leads to all this chaos and kind of behind the scenes, like just like, no.
Mhm.
So it's like it is unfortunate that it's like if you can only like in some circumstances and you can't afford to have a wedding without the support of family, and then that's when couples are like, okay, thank you, Melissa, for bringing this up, because we don't want to go down this road of ending up at a wedding day that we had absolutely no say in. It's not what we wanted. We're not
Mhm.
happy, miserable,
Mhm.
and all we wanted to do was elope and
Yeah.
go for a fabulous dinner afterwards at a local restaurant. Then have those conversations immediately. And
Mhm.
because it's only going to end up, it's not going to, if you think it's stressful at the beginning, it's not going to get better through the
Yep.
planning process, because planning weddings can just bring out just a different side of people. And so having clear communication
Yeah.
with the individuals that potentially might be contributing to your budget is definitely key and needs to happen if you want to avoid those situations, because it's not going to go away.
Man, I have not had relatives or guests or anyone like email me on the down low, but I do get, mothers of the bride or whomever contacting me saying, I'm booking the photography, send me your prices. And I have to
Yes.
be like, no, because I'm not working with you. I'm working with, your kids. So I need to talk
Yes.
to them. Um, I'm, maybe I'll show up and they'll absolutely hate me. And that would indicate I'm not the right photographer for them. So yeah, definitely make sure that you're talking to your vendors instead of your parents talking to your vendors. But also, like, if you really want to do one thing and your family is going to be contributing money to your wedding and they want to do things totally differently, I'd say go elope and then say, plan a
Yes.
reception. You do it. I will show up and I will be the guest of honor. And that'll be it.
Yes.
We'll
Yes.
eat and listen to speeches and shake everyone's hand that we haven't met before.
Yes.
Oh man. Yeah. I did have this, I remember having this conversation with someone years ago when I was a teenager. I went to this person's house with my mother. My mother was talking to one person in the house, and I was talking to a retired woman, and she's asking me about getting married and stuff. And yeah, I remember her saying like, well, when you get married, it's also going to be important to your mother, so you're going to have to take into consideration, what your mother wants.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Yes.
no, I've been preparing my mother for this for a very long time.
Yes.
She knows I'm doing what I want. Um, yeah.
A lot of people haven't had those conversations, so it can be
Oh
really
yeah.
hard. And then it's like ultimately the couple has to kind of, okay, what do we
I
want
know.
here? Because you see it so many times where you could see it
Yeah.
in the guest list. I'm like, so where are your friends? Like this is all your like just like
Yeah.
table after table after table of
Like,
like all the parents' friends. And I'm like,
yeah.
this is clearly a party for them.
Yeah. And there's like
For
one
weekend.
table in the back with like
Yes.
the friends, and they're the loud table because they actually know the couple, but they're in a
Yeah.
back corner somewhere where
No,
they're not
it's
going to
just
get
a
too
fight
much
of like,
notice.
okay, well, if we're paying for this wedding, and then it's
Yeah.
like who gets how many guests and kind of the battle of that. And then you see it when the parents do have they put a lot of pressure on the couple. It's like exactly that. It's like, oh, they're only allowed one or two tables of their own friends, and the rest is just their parents' friends.
I That is exactly when the parents should be just planning a reception on a separate
Yes.
date. And
But I feel like that's its own, just thinking about it, should be it's like I don't know if it would fly, but it's its own like separate side business of MTE is just
yeah,
parents that want to relive their wedding reception. So let's now that you're established, you have your career, you've made some
ooh,
money. Let's redo your wedding reception of how you imagined it to be and that you couldn't do at the time.
that's a good
I
idea.
wonder if it would take off because
We
that's
should.
ultimately what they're wanting to do. They want to put on
Mhm.
this like show production and look how great we are and all the friends and yeah.
I think what we are learning right now, Melissa, is that before you start talking to anyone about planning your wedding, the two of you need to sit down and figure out what
Yes.
you actually want to do, what you absolutely do not want to do. And then
Yes.
when you're telling your family, um, be like, yeah, this is what we're doing, just so
Yes.
everyone knows in advance.
Yes.
Um, be
Yes.
like really, 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 really sure about what you want to do. I have
Yes.
recently been working a lot on like myself in general, like knowing just doing what I want to do, basically. Um,
Hmm.
and you start to learn that like things are going to get stressful when things are not going the way that you want them to go. I can totally see how couples planning a wedding can be like, oh my God, it's so much work. They're putting together like they have to have a favor packing party, whatever they
Yes.
are, to pack favors that they don't really care too much about. Um, I think you need to like just make a whole list of absolutely things that I want to have, absolutely things that I do not want to have, and then yeah, and then talk to your family
Yes.
after you already know, so you don't have to have these awkward conversations later.
Yeah. Because it is unfortunate, and we talked a little bit about this offline that, when couples come to me and they're like, well, what's a realistic budget? And I like, we spoke about this. It's like, oh my gosh, like, okay, no, I have to really understand a lot more about what you're thinking about doing before I can give you a realistic number because there is so many variables when it comes to a wedding.
Yep.
And, um, unfortunately, there's no, and I wish there really is no cheap and cheerful anymore because it is the rising cost of everything, food being one element that it's kind of hard for clients to grasp that it's going to cost X amount of dollars per person just in food. And, when people are like, can we get away with like $30 per head? And I'm like, you can't even go for fast food for like that anymore.
No.
And so when you're
Nope.
factoring in, you do your grocery shops, food costs. Then it's someone to do all the prep, and then the actual cooking and then execution of the food. So kind of when I explain and they're like, oh yeah, now I get why there would be like there's all that labor on top of what the actual food cost would be.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I always, when we're sitting down and we're chatting about starting to build out the budget, I say, what are the most important elements? Like number one, two, and if you have a third, but like kind of really digging into, okay, at the end of the day, what are the two things that you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to be really upset if this doesn't happen.
Mhm.
And then I go, that is where we need to allocate more of our budget to. So if like music is super important to you, having your playlist on your phone and hooking up to a family friend speaker just isn't going to do it.
Mhm.
If at the end of the day, you're going to be really upset about sound quality, sound volume, we need to hire a professional. So those are the things where we really talk a lot about because
Mhm.
if you're thinking you can do everything, just like do it yourself, unfortunately, you get what you pay for. So if we're really going, if food is super important to you, and then you want to go and get the cheapest price point food option,
Mhm.
and you're upset when it's not hot and the quality of the
Mhm.
food and the taste of the food isn't what you wanted it to be, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, right? So I've seen it all. And so if it's super important, like talking about photography, like
Mhm.
if you want to do a family friend, which I never,
Bad
ever, I'm
idea.
like, do you want photos of your
Yeah.
wedding? Then don't
Yeah.
do that. Don't do that. No, 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 no. Like no, I can't go there. It's like, so
Yeah.
it's just like you have to hire a professional and
Yeah.
you have to put money aside in your budget because
Mhm.
if you want quality photos, you need to
Yeah.
invest in that. And it's unfortunate when people are just, and I get there is sometimes where that could work,
Mhm.
but I've seen it before where the pressure of taking the photo as a family friend, they've never had that pressure of getting those
Mhm.
shots. They can't redo it.
Yeah.
And they've been so disappointed with the photos afterwards. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
No.
Like, you
Yeah.
get what you pay for. You didn't pay for it. So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, right?
That that is a conversation that I have had with couples when, they'll reach out to me, we'll talk about price, and then they're like, that is way out of our budget. We were thinking more like $1,000. So for the couples that are coming to me, they're going to my website, they're reading everything, they're looking at my photos, they're talking to me about wedding photography, which would suggest that they liked what they saw on my website.
Yes.
Um, if this is what you want, but that you're saying that your budget for photography is $1,000, I think at that point you might have to increase your photography budget. But there's another option here, which is photography actually important to you? And what do you want to walk away with at the end of the day? Because you could do all Polaroid cameras, and that could be
Mm,
all of your wedding photography. You could say we're not doing an unplugged wedding. Everyone bring your phones and take a zillion pictures and throw them into this Dropbox folder. And then like if you don't need your photos to look a specific
yeah.
way, then you can get away with that sort of stuff. And when I have these conversations with couples and I'm hearing like your budget is $1,000, I'm saying if your absolute top budget for photography is $1,000, that tells me that $1,000 probably means a lot to you. And if you're not willing to part with it for, high quality services, then
Yes.
it might make more sense for you to hold on to it and put it towards something else that,
Yes.
you know, because if what you want is me, but your budget is $1,000, when you go and book the $1,000 photographer, you are not going to get what you want.
Yes. Yep.
So, and I'm sure you see that all the time.
All the time, unfortunately. And I can, it's always the conversations after the fact where they're like, I wish that I had taken your
Yeah.
advice. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, but so many times, unfortunately, the expression you get what you pay for has yeah, it's having those conversations, right? It's just
Mm,
like, okay, are you going to be upset or not? And if you're not going to be upset, then it clearly isn't an important element
mhm.
to your wedding day.
Yeah, for sure. And like, do you really need gold plates? Like, if you're
Yeah.
not going to care, don't spend the money on it, for goodness
Yes.
sake.
Yes.
Really figure out what you really want and then get those things. Not, don't go and get all the things that you don't want because it's just unnecessary expense and stress.
Yes. Yes. And a question that I get all the time is like we were talking about navigating different prices between
Mhm.
vendors. And what is interesting is that let's specifically talking about photography, for example, is that there is such a range in terms
Yeah.
of, and a lot of clients are not really like prepared for that large range in terms of for the same amount of hours and the
Mhm.
same amount of edited photos that they would receive. There's a huge, like, that's where it's like, that's when people ask me, okay, well, what will my budget be? I want photographer, food, DJ. Like, they give me the certain things that they need. And I'm go, well, each one of these could have like a
Mhm.
huge range in price. Um, do you often have to have those conversations when you're doing consultations with clients, or do you find that most of the time they have an understanding of what they are like, this is the most we will want to spend on photography. And so if that means we can't work with certain photographers, so be it. Like they have a number in mind of like, this is how much photography should cost.
Mhm. So usually the people who are booking with me specifically want to work with me. Um,
Yeah.
and I do things a little bit differently. So that kind of helps different, like couples differentiate in their minds. Like they're going to look at the photographer who's like super elegant and, you know, behaves super professionally. Not that I don't behave super professionally, but I crack jokes. So we're just gonna
Yes. Yes.
just gonna accept that. Like I'm not that type of photographer. I'm like, life is messy. Someone's gonna fall down while we're taking photos. It's gonna be okay. Like, you
Yes.
know? Um,
Yes.
so the people who tend to book with me specifically want to work with me. I definitely have couples who say, well, we were thinking about a budget more like this.
Hmm.
And I really think they might be choosing that number arbitrarily because it's usually not, close to the starting range for professional photography. And then there's the people who just have absolutely no idea how much wedding photography costs and how much they're comfortable spending, which is always a dangerous place to be in because they'll
Yes.
send out 20 emails, they'll get 20 spreadsheets back with pricing, they'll look at them and just choose the one where they get the most hours for the least amount of money. And that is the
Yes.
worst way to do it. Do not do that.
Yes.
And I say this to couples that I talk with. It's all over my website, everything. I'm like, talk to your vendors before you book them. Like, you have a
Yes.
conversation with them because you have to like them, especially like your photographer, your DJ. Can you imagine having a DJ that you think is just an ass? That would be awful.
Yes.
Yeah. And like, this is just you can't have your wedding budget figured out before you start planning your wedding because you're not going to know what the prices are going to be. And I know you've told me like even food, like the range in price for food can be
Yes.
insane. You can't
Yeah.
really expect anything in particular when you're going into planning. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge educational piece with my clients when we are doing that discovery call, and it's just like, yep, you can pay anywhere from 2 to 10 for photography, and it really it's years of experience. It's also I get a really good understanding of like what they're looking for, and then I will
Mhm.
recommend, hey, I
Yes.
think based off of what you told me,
Mhm.
personality wise and portfolio wise, these would be like my top three that I would recommend, and really give them the opportunity to like, you go explore their sites, explore their platforms, get an
Mhm.
idea for their work, and then come back to me. And if there isn't a right fit, I can always send more. But I always say exactly like you said, having that consultation because I can make my recommendation, but at the end of the day, like it needs to be the right fit for you. So having
Mhm.
those consultations before you go to contract with your vendors to make sure that it is the right fit.
The number of times that in the span of, let's say, 7 days, I have had someone book a consultation from my website and then like I follow up with them pretty much immediately. And then
Yes.
they're like, we've already booked someone. I'm like, so that means that you didn't talk to them.
Yes.
You booked them based on a PDF.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, bad idea. And I hate to say with photographers, it can be really, really confusing because everyone has such different styles. There are some amazing photographers in this area, for example, whose style I will just never be able to figure out or match.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
interested in doing those styles, but like it's just not me. So with photography, you need to sort of have a good idea of what sort of style you're looking for, what you
Exactly.
want your
Yes.
photos to look like. But beyond that, like if I could ask for prices and get a whole bunch of prices back, and it's like 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, you're going to get X number of photos back, all digital files and stuff like that. And just all of those numbers don't tell you really anything about, I mean, it tells you how much it's going to cost, but it doesn't tell you what you're
Mhm.
going to get or what the experience is going to be like. And,
Mhm.
you know, the person who's just starting out, just building their portfolio, they could be the most eager, secretly talented, like really hardworking photographer, and they could cost you $500. And you could book a photographer who costs you $10,000 and they might be the biggest diva in the world and make your whole wedding about them, which is a
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So you need to talk to these people. You need to
Yes.
have a conversation. I have told clients I don't want to work with them. I mean, I don't word it like this when I'm telling them, but like they are not the right fit for me. So like
Yes.
I'm not going to do my best work. They're not going to enjoy themselves as much because my jokes will not be as funny. And yeah.
Hi, I'm Becky Waples, the host of the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast. The podcast that celebrates small town creators and shares their stories. From their background to where they found their courage, from their challenges to their wins, from where they found their inspiration to how they took their first step. Join us each week to hear how each guest turned their big dreams into reality. If you are a creator, an entrepreneur, or love someone who is, subscribe now to the Small Towns Big Dreams podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and let's grow together.
Yeah. I don't know.
And it's hard. I know it could be overwhelming for the couple as well because they don't know the questions to ask. So there might be red flags in the
Yeah.
consultation call, but they're not picking up on them
Yeah.
because they just their
Yeah.
first time, they don't understand the process, they don't understand the questions to ask.
Mhm.
And that's where, my role as a planner comes in. I support them with that. I also say, if you want me to pop on the consultation calls with you, let me know. But based off of what we've discussed, here's some important things that I would want you to address directly with them, and make sure that they're comfortable with. So that's kind of where I support them if they don't want me joining the call to kind of like, you know, interject with like, oh, how about this? How about this? I send them in with some notes based off of what they have previously expressed to me. So
Yeah. And I have put together, I have a PDF workbook for couples looking for a photographer. And I
yeah,
just, created that based on questions that I am asked and questions that I am not asked. So questions that I am asked that you should not ask because it's a waste of your time. And then questions that I am not asked that you probably need to know about.
that's
And
great.
like a lot of the questions that are asked that don't need to be are like, what kind of camera do you use?
Hmm.
Are you going to give me raw files? And couples, unless you're a photographer, they don't know what the raw files are. There's raw files and then
Yeah,
there's unedited files, and those are two different things. So that's in that guide if you're wondering what the heck raw files are. Yeah, it could be very complicated navigating all of this. So like I hope people are listening to this, but also like if you're planning if you've never been a part of a wedding before and you want it to go a very particular way, you should probably hire a wedding planner.
yes, yes. And it is interesting how you were saying it's like that. How do they know how many hours? What's their timeline
Yep.
looking for? Sometimes photographers, they want to work the more hours they work, the bigger
Yep.
their that line on the budget is for them.
Mhm.
Which it's great talking to you and understanding how you operate when on the day of, but like it is unfortunate when I'm like, why is the photographer here at 7 a.m.? Like we
Yeah.
don't need
Yeah.
the photographer here so early. Most of the times when I do ask, like, do you want photos of, disheveled hair half done, makeup half done? And they're like, no, like I don't want any of those photos. I don't want any getting
Mhm.
ready photos at all.
Yeah.
So, but they don't know, they're not thinking about that in the moment. They're just like, oh, I
Yeah.
need the full package. Like they
Yeah.
always think like the bigger the better. And it's not necessarily for some couples, yes.
Mm.
When I ask the questions, they're like, oh yeah, I want that, I want that, I want that.
Mhm.
Others are like, no, like
Mhm.
I don't feel comfortable in front of the camera. I want it to capture some of these key moments, but I don't want it to be this like 12-hour thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that could be really challenging for people too, because you see the photographer at weddings, you might see the photos later, but you're not really there for the whole experience unless you're like in the wedding party.
Yes.
So, yeah, unless you've been in a wedding party where this photographer has shot before, you really don't know a whole heck of a lot. And with packages, like if you're just going based on PDFs, then generally you're picking the package that suits your budget but has the most stuff in it, whatever
Yes.
that stuff is, for example. So personally, like what I like to do is build a package specifically for each couple that I work with, because frankly, it's just easier for me. I don't need to be selling people on a package that they're not
Yes.
using everything in it, right? Yeah. And
And-
I'm sorry, you don't need a photographer for 12 hours for most weddings. Also, I don't want to be at your wedding for 12 hours.
Yes. And that's how I find, since moving from the city, I'm very transparent with my hours. I have put packages together to kind of give clients an understanding of like, okay, if you're just hiring me for day of, this is minimum, like this is based off of past experience. This is what you'd be looking at for hours. Even when people say, oh, I don't think we're hit those hours, they do.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
like, this is years of experience. I know that kind of, that number. But I am very like, my clients are all over. Some of them are like, hey, we want to be in part of setup and tear down. I don't know why, but again, it sometimes
Yeah.
comes back to budget. And so
Yeah.
I don't want to say, hey, I don't want to, it's not the right fit. I can't work with you because I'm not in charge of setup and tear down. There is elements that I'm managing in both of those, the setup and the tear down, but if you don't need myself and my staff to be there, I'm not going to force myself on you to be
Mhm.
there. And then also really understanding where they're going to need me on the actual wedding day. I will make suggestions to them, but they might say, oh, in the morning I have so and so and so and so that's going to do this aspect. So you don't need to show up until closer to ceremony time. Other
Mhm.
times they're like, no, we want family and friends to be completely hands off. We need you being
Yeah.
there first thing in the morning to do this massive checklist of all of the different decor and other elements that need to be set up the morning of. So
Yeah.
it's, I advise them, but I'm never like, I'm there, even if you don't want me to be there. Sometimes
Mhm.
couples want me there for an hour or the day before to run rehearsal. It's also a great time for me to meet their bridal party if they have one,
Mhm.
or their close family and friends, so that they have, who's this random person on we have an opportunity to chit chat and to get to know each other the day before the wedding. So if I haven't already met them before. I like that. And I think a lot of clients that have worked with me love that transparency of like, okay, great. We know exactly where our budget is going towards when working with Melissa.
Mhm.
It's not just like,
Yeah.
what did she do? What was she? Everything's like clearly documented and laid out
Yeah.
in terms of how many hours I spent planning and how many hours I'm actually on site executing the wedding weekend.
Yeah. And it's just sort of funny because yes, transparency is awesome. But I've
Yes.
heard that comment from people before, like, where were they? What were they even doing? Like
Yes.
specifically with wedding planners. And that one kind of drives me nuts because I'm like, they're doing something. That's why you're not seeing them.
I know, it's so funny because it's like I sometimes my clients like really want to, I'm typically running all over the place on the wedding day, but I'm like, you don't
Yeah.
want to talk to me.
Yeah.
You want to talk, you want to, and
Mhm.
I've worked with unfortunately planners in the past throughout my career where it's like, this isn't your wedding. Like, why are you in front of the couple 24/7, like chit-chatting
Mhm.
with them? It's like if sorry, like roles reversed, it's like they
Mhm.
get to maybe see these family and friends like once every blue moon, some of them, right? So
Yeah.
it's like that's who they should be spending their time with, not the wedding planner. So I always try to keep, I'm there, I'm watching
Mhm.
them. If
Yeah.
they need me, I'm there for them, but I'm not going to be like front and center and occupying their time.
Yeah,
That's just
for sure.
why that's how I run my business, but I've seen all of it. So
It's interesting. Weddings can definitely be interesting. That's for sure.
yes, yes. We probably have a whole 6 podcasts just talking about the
Yeah.
unique vendors that we've worked with over our careers. So I feel like I've seen it all.
Yeah, you probably have.
Well, I had a crazy last season, 23 season. I worked with some very unique vendors, let's just to put it
Okay.
politely. And there was some situations that I had not been put in.
Hmm.
It was first time going through stuff. So
Yeah.
still learning,
We're gonna have
going
to.
into my 20th season next year. So still being surprised on my toes. So, and
We're
that's
gonna.
also, it's after the fact, giving yourself some months to, I can, I can laugh about it now, but in the moments I'm like,
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
why do I do this to
Yeah, for
myself?
sure. Well,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to get coffee so you can tell me all of these
Yes.
stories.
Yes.
Um, I we're like reaching the end of the time for this particular episode, and we've obviously like talked a little bit about budgeting and everything, which is basically, I
Yes.
think, what we've determined is you can't assume a budget.
No, not at all.
um, but what do you think are like the top 3 things that couples need to have in order for like any wedding? You know?
Yes. So first thing I say before going into discovery call with me is really going through your guest list and having a
Mhm.
clear understanding of like, this is the max amount of people, sorry, that we would, so that's number one, because I always say, we can always pare back stuff. So if it's rentals, but we want to always budget off of like if everyone said yes. And obviously we know that would never happen, but especially when we're bringing in rentals, we always want to rent everything and then
Mhm.
take things down closer to the wedding date when we have a better understanding of your RSVPs. What we already talked about is a really honest, clear conversation about the budget.
Mhm.
Don't you know, don't think, okay, we can make this work or this work. It has to be honest. It has to be realistic because
Yep.
it's
Mhm.
because sometimes the couple's like, well, we think this, and then maybe
Yeah.
this might happen and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, let's just be honest because it's like you don't want to get yourself in a sticky situation. So let's just talk about like what's the realistic number. And if not, if something changes and if an increase to the budget happens because of whatever family or whatever may happen, then that's great. Then we can allocate more of a budget to a certain element. But then again, being real honest between the two of you of what is the most important elements to your wedding day, because that's where we're going to invest more of your budget in. If it's photography, then I need to know that, and we need to have really clear understanding of what your expectation is, and then more of the budget will go towards that. If it's food,
Mhm.
same thing.
Mhm.
So having those conversations early on, those 1, 2, 3 max really important elements to your wedding day. Then I always kind of give them the scenario. What would you be, you're reflecting the day after, what would you be? I wish we would have really done
Mhm.
this.
Yep.
That's the kind of conversations that you need to be having pretty
Mhm.
much immediately before we kind of get into the planning process.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
And don't download a checklist and
No, do
plan
not.
your wedding off that. I've had couples, one in particular that I'm thinking about. book me. So I am not the most inexpensive wedding photographer in the area.
Yes.
Book me, don't have a DJ. They had like a teeny tiny tent. They had caterers, but it was like a buffet style dinner. Someone just ran music off of an iPhone to a wireless speaker. The bride was in her dress until after photos. Then she went and changed into something else. And it was like a denim like dress, comfortable
Okay.
outfit. I'm like,
Yeah.
you can do that. They had their priorities straight. Like they knew what was
Yes.
important to them and what was not. And they didn't spend any money on anything that was not important to them. And I think
Yes.
that's really the way to do it.
That's
Again,
awesome.
if like cutlery and linen is not important to you, don't put 5% of your wedding budget towards cutlery and linen.
Yes.
I don't
I'm
know.
always like upset when, the cup, because, I'm planning typically 12, 14 months out. And some of my couples I work with, it's like, they're very into tablescape. They're very into
Yes.
the charger, the
Yeah.
napkin. And then
Yeah.
before even the photographer, that's my it's
Mhm.
just the guests don't appreciate it. I'm like, they come
Yeah.
in, they're throwing jackets, they're throwing purses, they're
Yeah.
putting down drinks. I'm like, we haven't even got the shot. So now I build
Mhm.
it in because most of the times the couples don't even have a chance to see
Yeah.
their decor set up before it
Yeah.
just completely gets destroyed. So I'm like, photographer, we're putting this shot into the timeline, so we're making sure that we get it. So if they didn't get to see it in real time, that they at least get to see a photo of all their work. Because sometimes that's really important to my couples, and
Yeah.
you don't even get to see it. And I always feel so
Yeah.
bad. I'm like, this is just months and months of work and Pinterest boards and all those things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this and no one take it personally, because if you really want like an over the top, well done tablescape, do it. I mean, that's great.
Yes. Yes.
Do it. But if you are not super into it, like people get unnecessarily into like tablescapes and centerpieces and stuff. And 100% of the time, if the centerpiece is like too tall, you can't even see the people across the
Yeah.
table from you. And then there's stuff everywhere and it's kind of a nightmare to like eat dinner. So, there's always a benefit to beyond just budget to not getting into the things that you're not interested in doing.
Yes.
It'll
Yes.
save money, it'll save stress, it'll save time. Your guests will be able to speak to each other across the table. But again, if you want like a giant vase in the middle of the table with a whole bunch of flowers hanging out of it, friggin' do it. Have fun.
Yes. And that goes back to they feel like they need to do this. And I've
Yes.
had conversations where it starts off, we're doing like literally nothing on the table. It's going to be very, very simple. And then there's pressure from a mom being like, oh, we have to do centerpieces or we have to do some sort of decor element. It always creeps up, unfortunately. And I'm like, no, you make a decision of what's going to make you happy. It shouldn't be what you've seen on Pinterest or socials or pressure from family and friends. I'd love to see more of that, like simplicity with tablescapes, but it seems to kind of always be like, we need to have florals and
Yeah.
okay, well, we need to budget for that. And so that's typically when oh gosh, we need at least $5,000 to like start our floral budget. Then
God.
it kind of like gets them
Yeah,
thinking, do I really want this? So
for sure. Flowers are flippin' expensive. Have you
yes.
had this conversation with a lot of couples? I'm just going to guess that the answer is yes, where they're like, they have a conversation with one of the mothers and then they come to you and they're like, well, I didn't want to carry any flowers, but then she told me that I have to have flowers. So now I guess I
Yes.
have to have flowers.
Yes, all the time. So typically, I am finding more and more couples are, for different reasons, like we discussed, budget, or it's just not important to them to have florals on the tablescape and the kind of the installments that you might see at the top of the aisle or entryways. But it always, I'm like, just have this conversation of, have you asked if the corsages and the boutonnieres and
Mhm.
the bouquet for the bride, like, have you had that discussion? Because it typically will always come around that maybe they won't do anything in terms of florals for the actual reception, but they'll always get florals for the wedding party if they do have one. Moms, grandmoms, like that kind of thing will end up happening because that's definitely like, okay, we can't not do this, right?
I can totally see if these are things that are important to your family, but they are not
Yes.
important to you, or like, I'm not carrying flowers. I can totally understand getting boutonnieres and corsages for like the parents of the
Yes.
couple. Like that, if you're like not wanting to do all the hoopla of like other stuff, but your family's like, but that's a really nice way to handle it. Okay, mom, I'm going to
Yes.
get you a corsage. It's going to be flippin'
Yes.
beautiful, and you're going to
And
stand out, and everyone's going to know who you are.
exactly. If they didn't know,
Yeah.
they're gonna know now. And it's just one of those things where it's funny because I actually really love florals, and
Mm-hmm.
um the I end up carrying the bride's bouquet more than the actual bride. And these
Yeah.
bouquets are anywhere between, anywhere between $200 to $300 for the one arrangement for just for them.
Or I was expecting
And
you to say 200 to 300 pounds. I was like, yeah, they're really heavy.
no, and they're really heavy, and then I'm carrying them around most of the time, right, when they're taking photos and having it be part of certain elements, right? And it's so funny because I'm like, every time I'm running around, I'll typically take a video of myself with the flowers, because I'm like, they're so pretty, but like they were there for a few shots and then they're tossed somewhere in the back. I typically will always recommend that we do some vases with water so that we could at least place it at the bar or one of the tables around the reception space. So at least they could be admired by guests
Yeah.
throughout the evening and just not tossed in a bridal suite or something like that.
Mhm.
So I do put that as one of my like processes, because I'm like, no, it's so beautiful. And like it's there for 2 seconds and then it's gone. So
I will say, when I do photograph like a beautifully decorated wedding, like they look
yes.
amazing.
Yes.
I could Pinterest flowers for a very long time. I could go down a very long Pinterest rabbit hole. But
Yes.
like
Yes, they are definitely gorgeous, but you pay for them. It is
yeah,
insane. And even with my own wedding, we left for our honeymoon and meet like the day after. And I was like, the one thing I wanted to spend more time with my flowers. It's like, because we had all these beautiful tablescape flowers, and it was like we gave them to our guests and everything like that. But I'm
yeah,
like, I wanted to spend more time
yeah.
with my flowers before I
So
left. Right? I didn't get to enjoy that week after with my flowers.
yeah.
So I just thought that was like, yeah,
That's
it is definitely something. If and there's no cheap and cheerful. And when my couples will say, oh, let's do this ourselves, I'm like, okay, I'm not being involved with this, because I've seen it
awesome.
go so left, and have
Yeah.
brides up until all hours of the morning
Oh
trying
yeah.
to do the bridal bouquets and their bouquet. And I'm like, don't do it. Don't do
Yeah.
it. Either allocate the funds or don't do it.
Unless you are
That is what
really
I've learned, especially on the flowers.
Yeah, unless you are really into DIYing and like you DIY all the time. I photographed weddings where it was entirely done by the bride. She
Oh,
had this one I'm thinking about. She had they had a barn, and the entire downstairs of the barn was wedding decorations. Like they put them all in there,
oh
and
my
then
gosh.
take them out, put them outside for the wedding and everything. She did an amazing job. She briefly thought about getting into wedding decor after they got married. She did an amazing job. I would not have done an amazing job. If it was
Because
me, it would have looked terrible.
sometimes I've had couples where they spend 12 to 14 months sourcing all these things. It's like almost a full-time job for
For sure.
them.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that they love it. Like it's a
Yeah.
passion for them. That's
Yeah.
a hobby. So they don't see it as work.
Exactly.
Um, So when I have a couple like that, I'm like, okay, this will be fun for you. But then I know immediately when it's not going to be fun, I go, don't do this to yourself. Do
Yeah.
not do this to yourself. Either allocate the budget, have me source stuff, or we pay someone to support us with either decor, or just don't do that, because it's always comes back of like, why are you it's always the thing that kept them up the night before and they're working on in the morning. And I'm like, do not do that to yourself. This is your one day. And, that little decor in the corner, your guests aren't going to know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And if all you do is get your marriage license and sign it at your
Yes.
dining room table, like that's fine. That like
Yes.
if that's what you want to do. I actually was listening to a podcast at one point. I can't remember what it was. And I might have told you this, but it was an officiant talking about how this person specialized in fast weddings. And he once went to a wedding and left the car running, went into the house, and married these two who were in a fight. So one of them was in one room, one of them was in another room, and he's in the middle going like, do you? They're like,
Oh
yes. Do
my
you?
gosh.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And then like they were married and that was it. Like it could be literally anything. It doesn't have to cost you anything in particular.
Yeah.
But you need to get your priorities straight for your wedding before you
Yeah.
start planning. Do not go and like book a venue and then book a photographer without an idea of how much money you want to spend on your wedding or what you want it to look like. Like,
Yes.
figure out what you want it to look like
Yes.
and then go with that. Or what you want it to be. Because it can be anything you want. And if anyone is listening to this and they go, I could do a brunch wedding, call Melissa because she wants to do a brunch wedding.
I know, I really want to do a brunch wedding. It's so
I would
fun.
love to do brunch weddings. I'm not going to say it right now because someone will steal it. We'll talk. Awesome.
Yeah, but it is, I really hope to see a change and that I'm trying to like, put that energy out there when I'm having consultation or starting the planning process with couples. And I hope to see more of it in the future of not the traditional timeline, not the traditional maybe day of the week or, the things that we've spoken about. So I'm interested to see what the future holds.
I'm even thinking like 20 years from now, what it's going to look like, because I think that we still base our wedding plans a lot on how our parents did weddings.
Yes.
And so the next generation is going to be doing their weddings based on how we do things. So we're getting a little bit more lax with like the rules of weddings in quotations.
Yes. Yes.
But the next generation has also been on social media pretty much since they were born. So it'll be interesting to see what they might just revert back to. No, we have to have 200 guests in a church.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah.
Oh, and word of advice, if you're having a wedding in a church and they don't have air conditioning, get fans, like the handheld fans. Because man, I have photographed some weddings where we all leave the building. We all walk out of the church at the end of it, and literally every person steps outside and goes,
yes, yes.
That's random and not related to anything we've been talking about.
No, but temperature is something we talk a lot about in our planning process because a lot of my weddings, it's not in a controlled environment. So we have to expect the unexpected. And so my couples are like, why are we talking about heaters in the middle of summer? And I'm like, I just want to be prepared. Like we've had the discussion, like if all of a sudden there's like, so it's just funny because we talk about hot, cold, rain, hail, tornadoes, like every possible weather thing that could happen and what is our contingency plan, if any, in those cases. So it is interesting because it's like the church is definitely one. It's like they're probably not going to have AC, or if they do have AC, it's not going to be great. Do you care if your guests are just going to be like melting away? And sometimes my couples are like, they can deal with it. It's only X amount of times. It's funny, the conversation. Or we prepare for it, like you said, bringing in some, fans, and then like the handheld fans, that type of thing, to be able to help with the situation. So
the upside to churches is that often they have an accessibility component to them.
yes,
so
yes,
that's a good thing. All right. Okay, we're gonna have to do more of these because there's obviously a hell of a lot more to get into. But for now, do you have a ridiculously happy moment?
So over the holidays, my husband and I were going back and forth with if we were going to do an international trip this year, and we officially booked our trip to Portugal in June. And so that's been on my bucket list for a long time. I'm a huge wino, so I love wine of all sorts. So we're going to an area in Portugal where we're going to be staying in an accommodation that's like amongst all the vines of the vineyard. So super excited. That makes me super excited. Like travel is like my thing. So I love, having that planned and looking forward to that in June.
That's awesome. That's exciting.
Yes.
Are you going to be tipsy the whole time you're there?
Probably. Because in Europe, they're always so social and they have their, afternoon nap. I feel like I was born in the wrong country sometimes. Like, yeah.
Yeah, we don't do it right here, that's for sure.
No.
Well, my ridiculously happy moment has to do with this sweater. So now I can see that I have to stand up. It's a bear.
Super cute.
I've been doing a lot of reading and work on myself and all that fun stuff. And I've been reading a number of books by Indigenous authors. And one of them was about, a component to it was spirit animals. And the bear was the first one that she wrote about. And I'm reading it and I'm like, well, that's me. Okay. So obviously my spirit animal is bear. Cool. And then like a few days later, my mother gives me this sweater with this bear on it without me ever having said anything.
Wow.
The bear. I was like, okay, clearly the bear is definitely my spirit animal. So I just thought that was cool. And also it's super cozy and it's an extra large, which is delightful because I'm hormonal right now and bloated. So this is my first time wearing it. I put it on. I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Yes,
today.
You can never have enough oversized sweaters. I definitely have my closet would tell you that.
I have a lot of them. And I wear them more than anything else.
Yes.
Where can people find you, Melissa?
So I have my website, www.melissatwist.ca, as well as my Instagram under my name, Melissa Twist Events.
Excellent. Awesome. And you can find me at Ridiculously Happy People on Instagram, and that's PPL, and on Facebook and on Pinterest, and at my website, sophialemon.com. If you want to submit your own ridiculously happy moment, you can go to happyp.pl/moment and you can record it and we'll play it on the show, or you can watch for the prompts on social media and send it that way. Thanks for subscribing. Please leave a rating and a review in your podcast app of choice. And for this episode, if you're on Spotify, I'm going to post a question along with this episode about what you want to hear from Melissa, because planning weddings is complicated. So whatever questions you have, post them in there. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.